Hello, hello, hello. And we're back. Gotta send out the tweets as usual. I see we got some people in the chat. Thanks for coming through. At least people on the stream, I should say. I haven't seen any messages in the chat yet unless I missed them. So let's see. Let's do that. Yeah, I think we're good there. Nice. V Fiber, good evening. Good evening to you as well. Thanks for coming through. Let the people come through. I always have to get do the last minute checks and things. Okay, there we go. Darren Martin, good afternoon. Gabriel, hello. Facundo, hello again. Maybe I should switch up my chat window here so it doesn't look I'm looking off in the distance. But I don't want it to look like as if I'm looking directly at directly at you all also. So because that's how that's how it goes. Babak, thanks for coming through. Hello again. Why is it? Excuse me. As soon as you get on stream, the need for water comes through. But that's okay. We got some in our handy angular cup here, as usual. So see if we can raise it up a bit. Let me know if my audio sounds okay. There we go. Should be better, clearer now, hopefully. Test, test. That's bad when you have to do a mic check on your own voice. Ah, yes, Edition Addict. Thank you for that. Need some hydration. I do. And I have some there, so hopefully the voice will hold up there. Much louder. Okay, cool. I had the mic a little lower too, so hopefully now that we got that sorted out, it'll be better for the watchers anyway. For all of you anyway. But like I said, thanks for coming through. But yes, we can get into it. If you saw the title, I didn't even put a fancy stream title on Twitch just because of the it's like one of those things I always forget to do. Is put the stream title on Twitch. So I think I was trying to be ahead of myself last time and I just cleared it out so it just says that I'm live, which I guess works out also. Um, Instead of just having, like I said, I usually try to put something. That's where the clickbait goes. The Twitch title alert is where the clickbait goes. Oz, good to see you again. Thanks for coming through. But yes, that's the inside baseball on the stream. There's usually something you miss, but that's okay. But yes, this stream is about server-side rendering Angular applications in the upcoming v16 release. And I wanted to take a look at some of these new APIs because some of the APIs things have changed, which if you're using something like Angular Universal and using like the Express engine, you may not even notice. Well, I guess you'll notice if you're using a standalone application, but if you're still using an ng module based application or bootstrapping with ng modules, then everything should still just work the same way. But they do have support for bootstrapping and rendering standalone applications now. And I've been using some of this in analog also. So I wanted to take a look and see, or we could take a look and see some of the new APIs and some of the things that have changed there with server-side rendering. And also the other thing that we mentioned earlier is the client hydration So take a look at some of those, or look at that API also, and see what things have come out of that work. So some of these things are still in developer preview. Standalone, I guess generating a standalone application is still not the default, just because we are still, as a community, still working to drive the standalone to be the default and move forward with that. So we'll get into some of those things along the way. But yeah, if y'all have any questions or want me to take a look at anything specific, feel free to drop that in the chat and we'll see what we can get into there. So I'm gonna start using this Stream Deck productively one day. But JSUA, hello, thanks for coming through. And maybe I'll get into it's a project that I saw today by my fellow contributor on Analog, Robin, put together. I may put a video out on that, but may take a quick look at that if we have time. So we'll see. But yes, let's get right into it. Guess we'll get some docs up here. Angular.io. Repost to simples. Can't wait for this stream. Seems awesome. Hey, thank you. Appreciate that. If you're using Angular Universal today, feel free to drop a me in the chat or something, just so I know who kind of uses it or if you're using it for something else. Make a video on that project. Yes, coming soon. I think it was an awesome project that he put together. It has a lot of things in it that I've been looking to put together, so I think it'd be pretty cool. So let's get into, where's my Angular tools? Developer guides. There you go, pre-SSR. So let's look. I don't know if the latest doc for server-side rendering has landed yet or not. Let's see. Main server. Doesn't look like it has. Yeah, so I was looking at the updated, or this is the docs for Angular Next, and this is for the next, of course, the next upcoming version of Angular, which is v16 as of this video. And I know there was a new guide that was coming for hydration for server-side rendering, and maybe that PR is still open. I haven't looked, but we'll see. Question for you: with the new version now, would it be possible to create an API folder and do CRUD operations there? Are you Balu? Hopefully I pronounced that okay. Are you talking about with Angular Universal to be create an API folder and do CRUD operations there, or something different? But yeah, server-side rendering in Angular. This is still based around bootstrapping ng module app, bootstrapping ng module at the root, but there is support for using a standalone application now also. And okay, cool. Maybe this is the part that I was looking at. Enable client hydration, which we'll get in further into that later. But I did want to check the doc. So if ever in doubt and you want to see what's on upcoming in Angular, check next.angular.io. The docs are there because those get published on every release to the main branch, I believe. But yes, let's close that. Enterprise SPA Angular now with SSR analog. Hey, look at that. Brother Nifty, good to see you. Thanks for coming through. Finite Singularity, what's up? Thank you for coming through. Okay, I was just checking Twitch to make sure I haven't missed any raids or anything. But yes, happy Friday Eve, of course. Can you do SSR with standalone components? Good question. Let's get right into it. So here we have I've generated a new Angular application. I just named it, of course, Angular Universal Standalone, which can get right into that question. But if you were doing this from scratch, we can open a terminal here and go to projects, or my projects, not yours. I'll bring this up in a second. Streams. So if we were creating a new Angular project, there's a few ways you could do this. I usually use npx Angular CLI, and I think that or you can use npm create Angular, but I'm not sure if that lets you do at next. But the way I usually do it is npx Angular CLI at next, and that will give you the next whatever's published on the next branch for that particular package. And I do new, we can do standalone universal. I do it in reverse just because, and you can pass the standalone flag there. So if you want to start a new application in Angular with standalone, you can use that command there. If you're using something like an X, I believe they have a prompt that you can use for getting standalone out of the box there. But yes, you can start a new application with standalone and already have one on here on the next release of Angular. Does it make any difference to make the app module standalone instead? No, but well, the difference is if you make well, you cannot make the app module standalone. You can make the app component standalone, but anything that you have to consume in that particular component has to be standalone too. All my components are standalone except for app module. Yes, that is one way to do it also. You just have to use your app component as an import in the ng module instead of a declaration. I believe that's the one thing you have to do there. But I figure if you've already made it that far, then switching over to a standalone bootstrap isn't that far of a stretch if your app component's already standalone. But yes, so I have a new Angular Universal application here. And I generated with the standalone flag, and you can kind of see some of the new structure that we have here for a standalone application. Before we had the main.ts, and there was using an app module here and an app routing module, I believe was the old structure. But there wasn't a dedicated routes file here. So some of those things are actually new. So we can look at, like I said, look at some of these files. We have our empty routes folder, of course. This one is actually a little different because they provide an application config for bootstrapping the app. So in the main.ts, you have your app config and you use that to bootstrap the application. And the pattern here that I'm seeing is that you can use the app config file, and this is where your like root level providers go if you're bootstrapping with standalone. So instead of putting them in the main.ts and kind of adding all that in here, you can put it in the app config instead and use that. We'll bump this up a little. Use the app config there. And you can have, of course, you can have other providers here, but these will be your providers that you'll have at the root of your app. So this works, like a standard Angular application here. We'll see if we haven't run ng-serve. Just wanted to make sure I didn't have anything else running there. We'll let that build. And then we can go over here and give us a standard, go to 4200. And we have our standard Angular application, Angular Universal Standalone app. All these things look pretty straightforward. Angular add PWA support, build for production, Angular dev tools, all the usual stuff that you would see with an Angular app. So we can stop that. So now if we use the, we can add universal to this application using ng-add, ng-universal. You want to use the Express engine because that's the default. The Express engine is what you get with a universal application by default. So we're going to use ng-add express ng-universal express engine at next, and then that will give us the next version of server-side or support for server-side rendering. So we'll do ng-add, and it shows you there expression engine at next will be installed. We hit yes, and it's going to install the packages and give us our initial setup here. And we see we have some logging things there, app ID, which those are things that may be set up in the schematic that just need to get cleaned up. But as you can see, we created a few files here, main.server, appconfig. Do you use Yarn? I use just about everything. Well, not everything. I use Yarn and NPM, and I'm looking to switch to using PNPM at some point. So a mix of a few of them. So the we added the universal, or ran the universal schematic. I added a few new items to our setup here for dev SSR, serve SSR for building and running your application inside of Angular Universal. So this is a two-step process today where you don't have a single build of both the things of the server or the client app and the server application, server side running application. But it adds these new scripts to your package.json, adds a few new packages for platform server and the associated other associated packages there. The tsconfig.server is just for compiling your server and main.server files. And we can look at the app config server. As I mentioned before, we have our app config, which has our routes in it, and then it generated an app config.server in v16 for a standalone app. I wonder why this is here. That's interesting. I wonder why they would generate that at the top of the file. Let's look. Sorry, getting sidetracked here. It's only there, so maybe it's maybe that shouldn't be there, but we'll take a look at that in a minute. Would you be able to upload this SSR app into Firebase? Does ng build? You have to build before deploying to Firebase. You can upload this application to Firebase. There is support for Angular Universal in Firebase. So I don't see why that would be an issue. And I think it does it for you. I think they have it set up to where if you run it, it will build it, and you can set it up to do the pre-rendering and everything when you do a push. So, but yes, we have our app config server. And one of the new APIs here that I did want to point out is, well, a few things here. We talked about application config, and now they have this merge application config utility function here that brings in the app config and merges it with your server config. And then we have this new provide server rendering function here that enables server-side rendering before. If you remember the old setup for server-side rendering with modules, you had like an app which we can go back to the docs here and look at this setup. We have an app module, and this is things that were set up after it runs. We have an app module, you know, the app server module, and you would have to add those. You have your app server module, and it would use the other modules for setting up server-side rendering. Sounds dangerous. Yeah. Yes. But with standalone components, or yes, with bootstrapping a standalone application, we have our main server here. We still are using the bootstrap application call here in our standalone component. But it has changed some. But before, like I mentioned, you export it in app server module, but in our main server here, we're just exporting a function. We're exporting a function that bootstraps the application, and then it takes this and in turn use that for server rendering. So this new bootstrap function is new for v16, and you do have to do it in a specific way if you're using Angular Universal as a default, so that it knows to pick this up when it renders the app. And we can look down in the server app here, where we have our server template that was generated. And we have if we go back down to here, we're importing this default bootstrap here. So it gives us a promise of an application ref, and we can pass that into the ng Express engine. And that is used instead of the app server module if you're using bootstrap in a standalone app. And then we have some other things in here also where you can set up REST API endpoints and do those, use those in your Express application also. But everything else is pretty standard as far as the Express setup and how it's set up previously in Angular. So we go back to our main server. We have our exported default as Bootstrap. We have our config here. The provide server rendering is the new way that you add server rendering support to your application. So this is just a provider now that you can use. So if we look at what's happening underneath here, we have our main server here and export the bootstrap. But what Universal does underneath is it uses something called render application. And it takes this bootstrap method. So we can say this is an HTML, is going to take this render application and take this config. And so this is going to take your application, and Express Engine does this underneath, but it takes your application, bootstraps it, and then renders it to a string, and then you get that back as your HTML. And this is similar to what, or not similar, this is what Analog is doing underneath, but these things are more exposed to you because you have more, it gives you a little bit more control because it can support different environments and things like that. So if we go back in here, we'll go in here and we'll just generate I'm not sure if we can generate a route. We'll generate a route called about, and an argument, of course. G component, generate an about component here, and we'll go ahead and add a route just so we have something else. We'll generate two routes. Ng generate C home. So we have a home and about, and we'll add those two routes here. And we'll use load component. And I don't want to import the app component here, but thanks, Copilot. Home module, not quite. Home component. So we should be able to standalone true. There we go. So it also defaults to ngm routing. Ah, yes. That is a good point, but we're not using modules here. So is it still going to, we could try that out. NGGM routing test. We'll call it test. And then we use dry run. So I just wanted to walk through and see what this will generate. So yes, this still generates a module for routing instead of standalone defaults to probably defaults to true because I generated the project with the standalone flag and it sets these things to true in the schematics configuration. So there's that's why we get the standalone true out of the box there because I used the generator or the schematic to do that. So we have our load component here, type of, okay, I know what I'm missing here. So if I change this to not home component and we do export default, that will fix my thing here. So if you didn't notice, you can use the shorthand import syntax here also, but you have to export your class as a default export in order to do that. So we'll go ahead and add another one here for about. And update this export also to default. It works like when you default to SCSS. Yes, you can update. You can definitely update the defaults for the schematics and generators to give you kind of what you want out of the box. We don't need to use load children here because we're just loading the components directly. And since they are standalone, we can do that, load them directly without having to use load children. Okay, so we should have a router outlet. We have a router outlet in here already. Yep, that works. Let's delete all the placeholder stuff. And we'll run this again just to make sure everything works correctly before we start server rendering things. Okay, we got home works. I know, it looks very nice. We could add the tour of heroes in here also, but that would be more effort to do there. So home, and this should be about. So we'll save that. And we have home and about. So we got two routes, home and about. Let's add a couple of links in here. Router link equals home. Thank you. You're listening to what I'm saying. You didn't add this for me direct automatically though, but that works. Home and about. Going to how to run the command ng add universal and standalone app without ng module. The good thing is I'll mention that is that you can run that command even if your application does not use a standalone bootstrap, and it will figure it out for you. But you do have to ngast utils. You may have to use the latest version of Angular or the next upcoming version of Angular, and you may have to use the @next on that command there. I'll type this in the chat here. ng universal express engine @next. That may be what you need there to add that, because that utility maybe only exists in the next upcoming version. I'm going to switch everything to standalone on Monday when I get back to work. Okay. I think you're like 95% of the way there. So you didn't have much left to do, which is pretty cool. Yes. So we'll go back to our app here. We got our home. Okay, did I stop the server? Home. Oh, this should be / and about. There we go. I'm pretty sure I was getting an error, probably getting an error in the console there on that. So we have our two routes. We're doing something pretty straightforward here. We could go get some some JSON data here in a second. But we have our two routes. We have our server rendering set up, but we're not actually using it yet because we have to use a different command for that. So we'll run npm run dev ssr. We can go back and look at our package JSON here. We have dev ssr, which runs the serve ssr builder from our configuration, Angular JSON configuration. And then if you want to build everything, you can do those in pre-render also. So we'll run dev ssr. And this still does the standard setup that you use today with the Webpack setup. So it builds your server and builds your application and then serves those two things together. So this is our regular application, and this we should have another one for our server rendered. Okay, I guess it did all on 4200. So we'll go back to there. So now we can see that we have our server side rendered application, ng server context equals SSR. And this would still render this page. Of course, all this should still work. So if we go into disable JavaScript and we disable that, so we disabled the loading of the JavaScript, so we can see that there isn't any. Only thing we're loading is the page and the styles and the fave icon. But we can see that we have some scripts in here to, those scripts aren't being loaded, but everything we need is rendered on the page already. So we have our home, and we go to about, and we get the same thing there. So we can still navigate through the application with JavaScript disabled, which of course is good for, and the main reason we want to do this because it's good for SEO, and let you do that. But we can still load the Angular application and all the rest of the things. You can see the other parts loading in here, the lazy loaded component work loading in here to take over after that. So of course we just don't want to render plain text here. Let's go into one of our routes here. The stream is all about staying hydrated. So we'll get a bit of water. So let's go into our about route here. We have our template here, about works. We won't get into whether you use inline templates or styles. Inline templates are HTML. I don't know why it's giving me a path there, but I'll take it. Let's go into our app config. And by default, we need to add the provide HTTP client. So we can use our good old trusty HTTP. And let's go get some JSON to-dos, JSON placeholder. If you're not using this, it's an easy way to go and get some to-dos to list. So if we paste that in there, we just get a list of to-do items, or you can use a specific ID for a particular one. So let's go into our about component. Oh, well, let's go and generate a new route. I guess we can keep that running there. We'll start a new terminal. So it is no longer about fastly serving the website while downloading JavaScript, but fully SSR. Um, the goal is to get both. You server render so you can get something on the page as fast as possible. And crawlers and things like that need server side rendering, or they need a page so they can inspect the contents of that page for like Google for search engine optimization. It needs the static version of the page so it can know what the contents are. So let's generate a component called to-dos. And we'll have that one, and we'll use that one. So we'll have one for home, about, and to-dos. And this will just be for our list. To-dos. I wonder if you can Todd's, because that was going to give us, I'll take a look here in a second because I didn't look beforehand, but if you're, I wonder if there's an option to generate a component with a default export. So let's look at the schematic here. Generate component / help. Because that would be useful, I think, if you know you're going to use something for a route. Export the declaring force defaults. It doesn't look like you can, so I think that might be an option worth opening an issue for a feature request, maybe. Great work on side questions. Where can I get open source Angular Express projects to contribute to in advance? Open source Express Angular projects. That is a good question. Would the website, I'll get to that question and then I'll talk about the other one. Would the website be fully functional even with JavaScript disabled? No, not if you're using Angular. Well, this is part of, um, not if you're using Angular, then you're going to need some JavaScript at some point for the page to function. There are tools out there like Astro that lets you server render a page and then kind of sprinkle in. If first of all, if you don't know what Astro is or you haven't used it before, you should because it's great. But Astro lets you server render a page and then sprinkle in some JavaScript when you need it. So, but the same rule applies. If you have JavaScript turned off, then the parts of interactivity that you need for that page won't work if you have it completely disabled. Because then you're just expecting to see static content. Like if you have a blog or something like that where you can render all the contents up front, then that will still, display the things on the page. But the moment you need some interactivity, you're still going to need your JavaScript to be there. Astro does a great job of only shipping the JavaScript that you need to render, only the JavaScript that you need to make things interactive. So if you're looking for another option to that, that would be an option also. Addition Addict, when will analog docs be an analog? Okay, we can take a sidebar here because I've thought about this also. If you haven't checked out analog, it is a meta framework for Angular. It does server-side rendering also because he gave me the underhand pitch there. So it does server-side rendering in Angular, static sites, also similar to Universal, but has a few other things as far as file-based routing and API routes that you can use to build apps with. I am considering trying to build, it's going to be a bit of a hybrid. I'm looking at maybe doing a combination of Astro plus analog to build the docs with. That way I still get all the static stuff and still use analog to build the site. The other option is to go fully in on analog to build the site and you still like use that to build all the static pages and everything else. I think that one will probably be a bit more effort just because you're having to like rebuild some of these pieces from scratch. But we'll see. I haven't opened an issue for it yet because I know if I open an issue, then people may try to jump on it. So that one's still up for debate. But I have thought about it because I think it'd be a good thing to have and to see where it falls down and where it could uh, come together. Because of course we want to have dark mode and everything else, like basically all the content that this page has, and a little bit more is there. So definitely look into it as that as an option. Okay, so yes, that was I was looking at whether you could generate a component with a default export. I think that would be a good feature request, but that is for another day. So we add our to-dos here, and we'll go all in with the new APIs in Angular for signal um, of an array. Will this give me never? Okay. We'll use any. We'll clean up the types here in a second. And we'll even go HTTP equals inject HTTP client. Well, we'll do it this way. We'll do it the way you're supposed to. We'll create a to-do service.ts. So we'll have, I could have probably injected this, generated this also. Export class to do service. No constructor. We're going to use to-dos in here also. Inject HTTP client. Add all missing imports. Get to-dos. Turn this HTTP. Get. There we go. It could do the single quotes instead of double quotes for me, but that's okay. So then here we can inject to do service, and we'll get our HTTP client out of here. Or I could just use fetch maybe. Let's go with that since we're going all in on then response.json. Thank you. And we'll make this one provided in root. ng on init. So we're just going to build up something quick here. To-dos service. Can you finish my sentence? Get to-dos. To-do set to-dos. Thanks. And we'll do our H2 in here. To-dos. I don't have a to-do list component yet, but we'll just take another list about an li. ng4 generated all the things. Let's go back and look at our JSON here and see what it gives us back. User ID, title, and completed. So we got completed, title, complete, and remove. So we can take those out for now. Save, common module. What do we need? ng4. Because we like to import things on their own. Ciao. What's up? Do you think that constructor method will disappear in favor of in the inject method? That's a good question. I I will go out on a limb and say yes, but not before Angular introduces. If Angular introduces a new authoring format, then I think it'll happen. I don't think they will deprecate constructor-based injection um, unless there's a way to create a component that doesn't involve a constructor. So that's my response, and I'm sticking to it. So we have our ng4. We don't need async pipe. We're going to use to-dos here. So because we have our signal, I'm surprised it's not giving me any type hints there. Writable signal any. This should be any array. Maybe it's just not constructor read-only service equals inject service. Yes, that would be ng4 of. I think they updated it to where either one is supported. Um, doesn't that diverge a lot of traditional OOP? Yes, it does. Um, but if we're thinking about component, okay, let's go back to, because I don't want to make it seem like I'm making this stuff up. Let's go to the new RFCs, signal-based components. If you haven't checked out the RFCs, you should do that also. Here's a link to the new RFCs, signal-based components. I'm getting off track here. We will get back to server-side rendering here in a second, but I did want to talk about this part because I think it's important. It provides context at least, since we got off on the other side. Here we go. Component lifecycle hooks. If you look at signal-based components, component lifecycle hooks are not bound to the component. And you say, that's interesting. Why not class methods? And the gold in this statement, which I've zoomed in too much, is here. Potential alternate authoring formats in the future. So if you want to read between the lines on that, you can see a future where we have these lifecycle hooks, but we aren't using a class component to create them. I'm not calling them function components or Angular's getting JSX or anything like that, but because the team has already said that they don't plan on doing that. So, but yes, I think there will be another alternative way to author components. I think there will be at some point, but we'll see. So we have everything here. ng on init, we get our to-dos, and we set to-dos. And if we go to here, unless I broke something. So we have our to-dos. We can make that a little smaller since we have some stuff on the screen. And so we're listing out our to-dos here. I think standalone and signals is enough to bring in their reactors. That is a take. I don't think it's gonna be. I've been working on a React project, and it's a lot different than, of course, admittedly, it's a lot different than using Angular, but I don't know. I think you just have to have a different mental model in how you want to build things. To me, React is I'm going to call React a framework. React is a framework of primitives. Angular is a framework of tools. React is a framework of primitives. Angular is a framework of opinions. And I think which side you lean on for whether you want more primitives or whether you want more opinions on how you should do things, that plays in largely to how you build your Angular, how you want to build your web apps, or what stack you want to use for that. Same goes for libraries like Solid or Vue. whether, like, if you take away all the extra stuff that they do, what does it enable you to do at the end of the, like, as a, like a core thing? React is a library. I don't think React is a library anymore. When they're diving into like how you build server applications with React from the core, I don't think it's a library anymore. I don't think it's been a library for a long time, but I think it's more obvious that it's not now. React is entropy, Angular is order, order makes life. Yes. So we have our to-dos here that we've fetched in our little small toy app here. Let's go back to, I think we're still running our, oh, fetch is not defined. Interesting. That's probably on me because I'm using, maybe on the version of Node that I have where fetch isn't included out of the box. So let's, just to be fair, let's use NVM 18 and run our dev server back up here again and see if we can render out some things here again this time. To-dos, okay. So if we go back to our, okay, I'm not getting an error here, so I'm assuming that we're rendering the to-dos correctly on the server. So we go in console log, to-dos, and yep, okay, so we're doing that correctly now. So you can run fetch on your server app if you're using like something greater than Node 16, which is probably the one that I was on. So we've rendered our to-dos on the server, and we're rendering, or when the application starts, we're re-rendering this application on the client. So if I disable JavaScript here, we can see we're not getting any to-dos here. So everything currently is getting destroyed. It's getting rendered and destroyed. What do we got going on here? Are we caching something now? Oh, that's fun. My to-do showed up, then they went away. Did my flag disable JavaScript's off? Okay, I'm not the only one seeing that. But as you can see, yes. Well, this isn't Vite. This is just a standard universal application that we have here. The version of Angular I'm using is 16.0.0 next.7. So this is bleeding edge Angular, but this is without the client hydration stuff in here. So that was just, like I said, there could have been a caching issue with probably with the server side of things. But yes, out of the box, it will, traditionally Angular will build or when your application bootstraps, it will destroy the DOM and re-render it all over again. So even if you server render everything, the first time Angular boots up, it clears the DOM and rebuilds the app. So let's go back into our thing and enable our JavaScript here. And now our to-dos are back. So now we can look into so we've server rendered the app. We've fed some data from an API, and now we can look into, well, we can look at what of course we can see that this should be pre-rendered, which I would expected it to be pre-rendered before already, even if I disable JavaScript. I didn't expect the to-dos to go away. because the to-do should still be fetched and rendered. And maybe view page source. That's true. Sources. To-dos. So yeah, I would expect that my even with server rendering and JavaScript turned off, I would have expected my to-dos to still be loaded here. So that's the part. So if I refresh again, and there they are. So it could just be that my cache is, something's going on with the cache there. Static files from browser, everything else. Doesn't look like I'm doing any cache in there, so less than 17. Okay. So let's turn our JavaScript back on, and we got our to-dos, and we can see that we are hitting the API. We're rendering them on the server. So we're hitting this JSON placeholder, hitting them on the server. Then on the client, we're hitting them again, hitting the API again. So we're doing this 2 times. Each time we make a request. Each time we server render, then we're making another request to get that data. So the one thing that has been added in version 16 is client hydration. So non-destructive hydration of the application. This is also a developer preview. So in order to enable that, we go into the app config here. We have our HTTP client. We can add provide client hydration. And this one allows you to render the application on the server, rehydrate the client on the application, rehydrate the application on the client without destroying everything and recreating it. And also allows you to remove some of the extra things you had to do with the router. So before, without client hydration and you wanted to use server rendering, you would have to go into your app server config, and for the router you would have like provide blocking, or it'd be provide router with enabled initial blocking navigation. And this would be routes. Missing imports, so I'm just using that as an example. But you needed this in order for server-side rendering to work. But with the new client hydration, you don't need to do those 2 things. So you just have your server rendering there, and in your app config, you have your client hydration, which allows you to render the app and let it wait until the app is rendered on the server. So we still have our application here. And if we open up our terminal here, we can scroll down to the bottom. And I guess it doesn't show us that the bootstrapping process here, but we can go into our to-dos and do some console logging here. To-dos dot length. So we got 200 to-dos on the server, and we have our to-dos on the client, and we can see, let me make this a little bigger. The provide client hydration, so before we saw that the application was bootstrapped and it was destroyed and recreated, but with client hydration, everything is done in place. So our application root didn't get destroyed and recreated. All of our existing components and things were there, and there are also some extra data here in the DOM of the page, which is our ng state. And we can see that it added some additional hydration data there. One thing that it should do, if I did everything correctly, and like I said, this is developer preview, so take that for, it's still in work in progress. So if something doesn't work correctly, it could just be me. But when we enable the client hydration, usually what you would see here before is Angular would do this would bootstrap 2 times. You'd see it bootstrap twice, once on the server, once on the client. But now we should only, or sorry, you will see the log message that Angular is in development mode. Let me check and see if the development for SSR is in development. So we got serve, test, server, development, default configuration is production. I see. Oh, wait a minute. Server, okay. So serve SSR, that should be in development mode. So I do see the Angular's running development mode. I didn't see it on the server, so maybe that's a little thing there. Sorry, got a little lost. So this means you now have to do less work to avoid the recreation of the DOM, or that you can avoid it and you couldn't before. Not really used to universal. Both. So it means that right, the framework itself handles the recreating of the components so that you don't have to, it's not something you have to worry about as much. Like so, it shows in developer preview here, but Angular hydrated 2 components, and 14 nodes, 0 components were skipped. Because there are things in the docs that allow you to skip hydration of the components. So you can, it is less work for you to be able to enable this. Only thing you have to do while it's in developer preview is add, I keep wanting to go to the main because that's where I put things, app config, and add provide client hydration to your application config providers. And it will allow you to rehydrate the app from there. So if I disable this, we still get the server application done on the server and the client. But the everything is okay. So that's interesting. So when oh well, no, we're on the client here. Sorry, I thought it was showing me the message on the server. But as you can see now, the message went away, so it didn't rehydrate. It didn't hydrate the application on load. And it basically recreated everything from scratch. Even though we server rendered the to-dos, it still rendered everything and re-rendered everything that was on the page. So, or re-rendered the entire application, I guess is more fair to say. What host is on the server side? Node.js. Yes, this is out of the box with Universal. You get an Express application that you can run in Node, or if you're running this on Firebase, you can run it as a serverless function also. But this is a standard Node setup here. So hydration would be the new feature. Yes, eventually, I would think that in the app config, because this was a question I had also. Why does it have to be an opt-in thing? Well, it's opt-in while it's in developer preview, but I think eventually you won't have to, as part of bootstrapping, this will just be part of the process because you get those features out of the box about the hydration without having to do better SEO, server-side rendering, and not recreating the page. Minko actually posted a tweet about some of the other benefits of this also, as far as largest contentful paint and those. So you can look that up also. And you still get that Angular kind of boots up after the application has JavaScript is loaded. So do I think that SSR, do you think that SSR will be the future of Angular apps from that moment v16 is released in May? I don't, um, because it's not provided out of the box. And I think there are some things that have to be improved with the developer experience for it to be server rendered out of the box. If we, I'll go back to analog again. These things in analog are all together out of the box. Server side rendering, um, which is part of why it works this way. If you're using analog and Vite, you get the server side rendering, you get the Node.js server also. Or if you're using Netlify functions, you can deploy this as a Netlify function. All those things come out of the box with analog. So analog is more of a putting all these pieces together uh, on how this works. Yes, that is true. Jeff Welpley did a talk at NGBE. NGBE 2023. Jeff Welpley. I probably spelled his name wrong. But yes, there's a link to that. I'll paste that in the chat also. He's been waiting on this feature for a long time. So definitely check out that talk. But he wanted this feature back then, and it's been some years. So, but now we're getting to a point where you can hydrate the application without destroying and recreating it, and that will help you also. Like I said, analog is about like bringing all these things together in a cohesive way, in addition to the API routes and other things it provides. So, did analog? Oh, good question. Did analog have hydration before Angular shipped it? No, it did not. The parts of analog builds on top of the things that Angular provides. So, hydration is something that that would have been a substantial effort for someone in the community to try to do, but the team has done it, so we can use that all in analog also. I do have a PR out there that updates analog to the latest version of Angular v16, so you can provide client hydration there also. So like I said, some of the things that Angular does as a framework, analog just automatically inherits as features, as you can use features. Now I am thinking about adding something that like let's say here you have here main server, you got bootstrap application, you got your server config, you're going to need server rendering, you're going to need client hydration. So we could put those two things, wrap those two things in like convenience methods and use those for there, because rendering and analog works a little bit differently. So I can show that here also. So in analog, we're using the underlying function that the Express engine uses, which is render application. So this renders your application to a string. And so we have provide server rendering, but we could take this a step further and have like a render function that comes from analog, or a hydrate function that comes from analog that includes these things out of the box. But that remains to be seen. Josh, what's up? Thanks for coming through. So yeah, the good question is SSR considered to be AOT compiler, or this concept doesn't apply here? Those are two different things. Um, Server-side rendering is taking what the application would produce and rendering that to a string before and sending that to the client first. AOT is ahead of time compilation. So like these components, we don't just ship these components like as they are to the browser. The Angular compiler compiles this down to a set of instructions, compiles your template down to a set of instructions. And that's what gets compiled. That's what gets compiled ahead of time. Your template gets compiled down to a set of JavaScript instructions, and Angular uses that to, along with change detection and everything else, to run your code. So you're not necessarily shipping HTML, this HTML directly. You're shipping the compiled version of this in JavaScript to the browser. That's what AOT does. So one thing I did want to look at before we wrap up here is so provide server rendering and provide client hydration. One thing that should do is, does this allow features? Okay. So with the app config, provide HTTP client, which I thought this was included also with no transfer cache. Yes. So by default, when you use provide client hydration, it should let you, which this may still be just work in progress, but it should also let you skip the double fetching that we're doing here. So we have our fetch here for our JSON placeholder, and we're using, and it's probably not doing it that way because I'm not using HTTP. So let's do that. So we got our to-do service. I'm using fetch here. So we're going to switch this to get to http.get. And we're going to say we're going to say first value from, to convert this to a promise. And then we can just take that as is, I guess. So if we do that, and okay, so then promise, okay, let's go back to here. Response is not, okay, so this would be response dot, this should be any. We'll convert this to an observable if we have to. First value from any, promise any, okay. So let's see if this works. Okay, cool. So that's what we wanted to see. We converted it, we used HTTP. I was using fetch before. Okay, got a question. How hard would you say it is to transform Angular application state to an HTML view? Yes. It's very difficult. Well, you're basically running a cycle over your Angular application and rendering that out to an HTML document, and then you're sending the HTML document as a string. So the framework knows how to render all of that on the first pass and give you that. So that's where the initial part comes in. But to go back to here, I use first value from an ArcGIS operator, and I'm just using any for the to-dos. Use HTTP GET. One thing that you do get with client hydration, I keep going to that file, provide client hydration, is a transfer cache. So what you render on the server will get stored, will get serialized and stored in the HTML and passed to the client. And now once you make that initial request to the page, like we have our to-dos here, we went and fetched those. And because we're using client hydration, we're going to open up the page here. If we go to the console, we had hydrated 2 components and 617 nodes, which was a lot more than we had before, it seems. But if we inspect the elements on the page, we can see, I don't want to break on whatever that was. Subtree modifications. Okay. We can see that our ng state here was the data that we requested on the using HTTP. We did not request that data again when we got to this page. So we still have our JavaScript turned on. So if we refresh the page and we go to our request here, where is my filter? There we go. Okay, maybe we do. We should not make this request again. But what this will do is the transfer cache will make sure all our IDs are lined up here. App config provide client hydration will cache the things that were requested on the server and reuse that data with the transfer cache on the client. So ideally, like the to-dos, maybe unless it was too much data or something. Let's go back and change that also. If we go back to to-dos, to-do service, I guess we can't limit. Let's check really quickly to see if we can limit that much data we get back. To-dos, posts, albums, 200 routes. Use guide for more usage examples. Creating, updating, patching, filtering, post user ID. Okay. I was looking to see if there's some way to limit it from 200, but the HTTP gets the request, and with the client hydration, what we end up with is that it would cache those requests on the server render and pass those along in the HTML. So what I wanted to see was in here that we would have this ng state and we would have all that data in here, but it also uses this data for the hydration for this part also. So maybe it wasn't, I'd have to look and see what was going on there with the data that we should have brought over from the HTTP request. So I thought that was included. And I'm going to check really quickly here on the transfer. As you see, I've been following this. So let's see. Okay. The request is there. So, so this is the PR. Let's see if this is included in this release. Commits. Committed 2 days ago. Yes, I thought this was included in this release, but let's check the changelog here really quick. Oh, gotta stay hydrated. Y'all are posting chat that was supposed to remind me. I guess that's things for channel points and things like that, but okay, HTTP, yeah, HTTP client to cache requests. Just reveal the secret. There you go. Commit as provide HTTP client with transfer cache. Yeah, so this one was added. Does YouTube have channel points? No, but YouTube only has like the super thanks. So if you want to give someone thanks on the video in money, you can do that also. But yes, what I was getting at here is provide client hydration by default includes the transfer cache. You can disable it without transfer cache with no HTTP transfer cache. It's something you can add to provide client hydration, and it will not use that HTTP cache by default. But if you do have it enabled, what I expected to see was, and maybe was that it didn't make the actual request. And this maybe my misunderstanding on me of how this works. But it wouldn't make this request, but you would still get that data there. But I'd have to check and see further how that part works, because it may still be in progress. It may have a limitation there. But I think on this part, you can see, we see the hydration data there that it provided from the server to hydrate the app on the client end. So there's that part of it. And as I mentioned before, Analog is going to get this hydration feature tested by turning off your internet. You almost got me. You almost got me. I'll just turn off the stream instead. How about that? We'll turn off the internet another time at the end of the day. How about that? But yes, I will push this. We'll take that out there. I will push this up, repo up, so you can show the rest of it there on, like I said, this was about Angular Universal and the upcoming changes to the server rendering APIs in Angular. Some of these things you may not see because of it, because it will handle this for you in the Express engine if you're using that. As I mentioned before, Analog uses some of these APIs already in a more direct way, but so we can take advantage. The good part is both and available in Analog. So for the people who watched the video after, if you want to tell me what you thought about what the upcoming changes in Angular Universal, leave a comment on the video and let me know what you think about it there. Of course, leave a like on the video also if you made it this far, and so other people will see it and be able to take advantage of the new upcoming stuff in Angular. Yes, and as always, be sure to subscribe to the channel so we can get more content out like this in front of the community. And that's it. I guess I should end the video with that, and then I'll send you in the next one or something like that. But yeah, thanks everyone in the chat for coming through, and thanks for all the questions also. We learn some of these things together, and I appreciate the questions and everything else. So we're going to keep pushing forward and keep things moving. So I will see you all next week, hopefully, when we will dive into another topic on Angular, and we'll see what we get into then. So we'll see you.